I stood there in the kitchen doorway, the forgotten hollandaise still cooling on the counter, as my son's laughter cut through the air like glass. "Mom's losing her memory," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My own child, the one I carried for 9 months, nursed through fevers, and built a future around, now measuring my worth in what I could still recall. After 50 years of being his mother, I became his punchline. He thought I'd forget the moment. Instead, I remembered, and removed him from everything. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The eggs were overpoached. The hollandaise forgotten entirely. Helen caught it just as she brought the tray out. Naked Benedicts, sitting on toasted English muffins like unfinished thoughts. Her stomach dropped, but her face didn't change. She smiled, wide and crisp, and set the plate down like everything was exactly as it should be. "Kyle, could you pour the orange juice?" she asked, already retreating into the kitchen to hide the flush crawling up her neck. The dining room hummed with late morning light. Sun streaked across the oak table, catching the edge of the antique sugar bowl and scattering gold flecks onto the white linen runner. The house smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and maple syrup, and the vase of dahlias she'd cut just that morning stood proud and perfect at the center. Kyle reached for the pitcher with one hand, his phone in the other. "You forgot the hollandaise, Mom," he said, laughing like it was a sitcom beat. From the kitchen, Helen heard it, just as she was reaching for the saucepan she hadn't used. Tina chuckled. "Oops," she said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. Kyle leaned back in his chair, smirking. Classic. Mom's memory's got more holes than her colander. Laughter burst across the table. Half real, half reflex. Grace laughed too, but hers died in her throat. She glanced at Helen's back, visible through the kitchen doorway, a flicker of something passing through her eyes. Worry, maybe? Helen didn't flinch. She took a breath, counted 4 seconds in, held it, then exhaled slow through her nose. The sauce wouldn't matter now. She closed the cabinet. She returned to the table with a fresh pot of coffee, her smile like glass, polished, fragile, and entirely see-through. "No sauce today," she said lightly. "I thought we'd go deconstructed." More laughter. Tina nodded approvingly. "Trendy," Kyle winked at his wife. "Watch out, Mom's going postmodern." Helen poured coffee into her own cup last. Black. No sugar, no cream. Grace didn't laugh. She played with the corner of her napkin, her face pale. The rest of brunch blurred. Conversation wove around real estate and baby milestones, movies Helen hadn't seen, and politics she didn't want to touch. She passed the jam. She refilled plates. She smiled in all the right places. The only thing she tasted was silence. Later, after everyone had left and the kitchen stood clean and quiet, Helen lingered in the doorway with a dish towel still in her hands. Afternoon shadows gathered in the corners, long and soft. She thought about the sound Kyle's voice had made. The slight sharpness underneath the joke. Not the words, she could survive those, but the tone, the easy confidence, the certainty that everyone would laugh, that they should laugh. Upstairs, floorboards creaked. A door shut softly, probably Grace. Helen moved to the credenza drawer, pulled out the leather-bound journal she hadn't touched in months, sat at the kitchen table and uncapped her pen. The pages smelled faintly of old paper and lavender oil. She wrote slowly, with care. Sunday, 10:14 p.m., made brunch, forgot the hollandaise. Kyle made a joke about my memory, loud enough for everyone to hear. He said it like it was inevitable, like I was already disappearing. Note: he didn't say it to hurt me. He said it because he thinks it's true. Tina laughed. Grace didn't. Remember this clearly. Do not forget this moment. She stared at the words, heart tapping softly against her ribs. A beat of something old, something sharp and quiet. A memory rose, uninvited. Her own mother sitting alone at a dining table just like this one, silent after a family joke no one remembered making. Helen blinked it away. She was not her mother. She still had time. Just as she was closing the journal, she heard it. 2 voices, hushed, upstairs. Not Grace's room. She rose, careful to avoid the creaky board by the pantry. and moved halfway up the stairs, pausing where the banister curved. Kyle's voice, low. "She's declining, Tina. You saw it." She forgot half the brunch. "Couldn't find the jam," repeated herself twice. "We've got to get ahead of it before it gets worse." Tina murmured something back, indistinct. Agreement, reassurance, maybe both. Helen stood frozen. One hand on the railing, the other clenched into the folds of her apron. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Not until she heard the bedroom door click shut. Then she turned, descended one step at a time, each creak louder than the last. She went back to the journal, sat again, uncapped the pen. At the bottom of the page, she wrote one final line. Game on. Helen sat at her desk the next morning, the journal from last night still open beside her. The sunlight filtered in through the slats of the blinds, falling in stripes across the mahogany surface. Her coffee had gone cold. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she opened the black accordion file she kept in the bottom drawer, one she hadn't touched in nearly a year, and withdrew a manila folder marked in her own handwriting, Will and Directives. The weight of it was heavier than she remembered. She eased into her chair like a diver slipping beneath the surface, calm and controlled. No ripples. She removed each page carefully, laying them out in neat rows. Everything was dated, initialed. Everything had seemed so clear at the time. Her eyes scanned line after line until she reached it. Healthcare proxy, Kyle M. Goddard. Primary beneficiary, Kyle M. Goddard. Her pen was already in hand before she even realized she'd picked it up. In the margins, she began writing. Trust should reflect actual care, not assumed bloodline. Blood doesn't buy attentiveness, familiarity, fitness. She pressed harder with each note, the ink darkening, etching the paper slightly. Her handwriting remained steady, beautiful even, the kind of penmanship no one used anymore. Helen sat back, exhaled, then rose. She walked to the hall closet and pulled down a gray plastic tub labeled medical. It was heavier than the will. At the kitchen table, she opened it and removed the blue hardcover binder she'd kept for 3 years now. She unsnapped the rings. Inside, meticulously arranged plastic sleeves holding test results, appointment logs, prescriptions, names of every neurologist she'd seen, scans, notes, questions she'd asked, answers she hadn't believed. At the very back, memory logs. Helen flipped to the most recent entries. Each page documented episodes, dates, triggers, duration, severity. Nothing dramatic, no wandering or slurred speech, but lapses in names, misplaced items, moments of blankness. She'd recorded them all, not to fear them, to track the pattern. She turned back to the first page, read her own notes aloud, voice barely above a whisper. Feb 3, forgot the oven was on. Burned sweet potatoes. Mar 11, couldn't recall word for microwave. Said food clock. May 26th, told Grace the same story 2 mornings in a row. She stared at the line she'd written beside it. Possible misattribution by Kyle, or remember to fact-check. Helen let her finger rest on the edge of the binder. Her nails were trimmed short, neat. No tremor, not yet. A soft buzz broke the silence. Her phone vibrated across the counter. She walked over and picked it up. Iris, the screen said. She answered. Hey, Iris said, her voice low, deliberate. Grace told me about yesterday. Helen leaned against the counter. Did she? She's worried. She said you didn't say anything when Kyle made the joke, but she noticed you writing later. She always notices, Helen said. Even when she doesn't speak. A pause. And Kyle? Iris asked. Helen stared at the memory logs still splayed open on the table. He's preparing for something. I just don't think it's what he thinks it is. Another beat of silence. Then Iris said, Don't correct him. That's a waste of time. Helen's lips twitched. Oh, I'm not planning to correct him. No? No, Helen said quietly. I plan to counter him. With perfect clarity. Her voice had never sounded more precise. She hung up, then walked back to the desk. Opened her laptop, typed Jacob Merritt, estate attorney, into the search bar. The result popped up instantly. Same firm, same office, same dry smile in the photo. She'd used him after Frank passed. Jacob had always been professional, dull but thorough. the kind of man who believed in ink and law. She clicked call. A woman picked up on the second ring. Jacob Merritt's office. "This is Helen Goddard," she said. "Tell Jacob I need a full revision scheduled. Will, trust, proxy, everything." A pause. Keys clacking. "Earliest appointment is Thursday at—" "Make it sooner," Helen said. Voice soft but unmoving. "This isn't maintenance. It's an emergency correction." The silence on the line lingered just a little too long. "I'll call you back in 5, the assistant said quickly. "Let me shuffle." Helen hung up. She sat again, picked up her pen, turned to a fresh page in her journal. This one had no date. She wrote just one line. "They're betting on a memory they think I've already lost." Her hand hovered, then she added a second line. This one smaller, angled, tucked into the lower corner. "Let's make them regret that." She closed the journal, tight. Snapped the elastic band. Just then, the front door opened. Footsteps. Kyle's voice, unannounced. "Hey, Mom, forgot my sunglasses yesterday. You home?" Helen didn't answer right away. She looked down at the open binder, the will with her fresh annotations, the journal still warm with ink. Then she stood and smiled, wide, crisp, and entirely unreadable. The cafe was 2 blocks off campus, narrow, brick-walled, with overgrown ivy curling around the front window like a secret trying to get inside. A warm wind pushed through the half-open door as Grace stepped in, her messenger bag slung heavy across her shoulder. Helen was already seated in the corner, back to the wall, facing the door. She wore dark sunglasses despite the indoor lighting. The lenses reflected back everything. Grace hesitated just a second, then approached. "Hey," she said, setting down her bag and sliding into the seat opposite. "You beat me here." "I never left early arrivals behind," Helen replied. Her voice was calm, low. She took off her sunglasses. The lines under her eyes were deeper than yesterday. Grace smiled gently, then looked down at the tabletop. "I'm sorry about Dad." Helen didn't blink. "You didn't say anything wrong." "No, but I should have said more when he did." Grace exhaled. "He treats your age like it's the same thing as incompetence. It's not right." Helen stirred her tea slowly, her spoon making soft circles. "He's not the first man to confuse years with erosion." Grace looked up. "Still, I should have said something at brunch." "You didn't deserve—" Helen interrupted, her voice cool and even. "I forget things, Grace. Names, appointments, words sometimes, but not people." Their eyes met. Helen leaned in slightly, especially not the cruel ones. A long silence bloomed between them. The cafe noise dimmed, just background murmur and the hiss of the espresso machine behind the barista. Outside, a cyclist sped past in a blur, and somewhere in the corner, someone clicked a lighter too many times. Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. "Are you safe, Grandma?" The question hung there like a thread waiting to snap. Helen folded her napkin carefully, smoothing the corners before answering. "That's why I'm rewriting the rules." Grace leaned forward, almost instinctively. "What kind of rules?" "The ones that decide who gets to speak for me," Helen said, her gaze steady. "Who gets to speak instead of me?" Grace nodded slowly. She reached for the ceramic cup in front of her, her fingers suddenly trembling. "If you ever need someone else, if it gets harder and you don't want to rely on—" She stopped herself. "I could be that person." Helen blinked. "Power of attorney? Or just backup, someone who listens instead of assuming?" Helen didn't answer right away. She looked at her granddaughter, really looked, past the tired college eyes and the soft voice. Grace had always seen through noise, even as a child. She was the only one who never asked Helen twice if she was sure about something. Helen reached across the table and placed her hand gently over Grace's. Her skin was cool, her grip light, but it lingered. "It may be needed sooner than you think." Grace didn't pull away. Her thumb curled softly under Helen's palm, anchoring it like a promise. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Helen's phone buzzed on the table. The screen flashed. Jacob Merritt, 9 North AM confirmed. Helen silenced it without looking down. Her face never changed. She simply turned back to Grace. "Do me a favor," she said softly. "Anything. If he asks, don't mention we met today." Grace nodded slowly. This stays between us. Helen smiled, just barely. Good girl. Then she stood, gathered her things, and slipped the sunglasses back on. And as she left the cafe, sunlight blooming across the sidewalk, she didn't look back. But her reflection in the glass door lingered a second longer than the real woman walking away. The elevator rose like a held breath. Helen stood in the corner, her handbag clutched loosely in one hand, her coat buttoned to the top despite the warm October morning outside. She watched the floors tick upward. 6, 7, 8, until the brushed steel doors opened with a sigh. Jacob Merritt's office sat on the northeast corner of the building, framed in glass, and the kind of walnut furniture that suggested old money and cautious decisions. A receptionist greeted her with a smile, too wide to be genuine, and offered tea. Helen declined. She's early, the receptionist whispered into the headset. She's punctual, Helen corrected, without looking up. Moments later, the frosted glass door to the conference room swung open. Jacob stood on the other side, tall, balding, in a charcoal suit that still had the dry cleaner's crease down the sleeve. He gave her a practiced smile, the kind lawyers wore when they weren't sure whether to console or congratulate. Helen, he said, extending a hand. She didn't take it. Let's begin. Inside, the conference table was long, sterile and immaculate. 2 pens, a yellow legal pad, and a stack of fresh documents were already laid out. A silver pitcher of water sat untouched between them. Jacob took his seat, opened a folder. You asked for a full revocation and rewrite. I'll confirm before we proceed. This includes your last will and testament, trust declarations, durable power of attorney, and healthcare directives. Helen sat down, removed her gloves one finger at a time. Every word with his name on it. Jacob hesitated. Just to be clear, his refers to Kyle Marcus Goddard, she said, each syllable crisp, as though reciting it in court. Jacob clicked his pen. Understood. He adjusted his glasses and began turning pages. The process was not fast. It never was. Legal surgery took patience. Jacob read line by line, clause by clause. Each mention of Kyle's name, on the healthcare proxy, the durable financial power of attorney, the irrevocable trust, was highlighted and struck through. Helen watched each red slash land like a scalpel. Her expression didn't change. When they reached the beneficiary section of the trust, Jacob paused again. You've named your granddaughter Grace as co-trustee, alongside a professional fiduciary. She'll need a partner, Helen said, and a buffer. You're sure? He asked, not challenging, just cautious. Helen tilted her head slightly, the only gesture of thought. She listens, he doesn't. That's all I need to be sure. Jacob tapped his pen against the edge of the document. Is this permanent? Helen looked up slowly. Her gaze didn't flinch. So was his mockery. Jacob nodded, the finality settling between them like dust. He flipped the next page toward her and pointed. Initial here, and here. Helen took the pen. Her initials bloomed on the page in steady, elegant ink. She signed with a calm practiced over decades. Teacher's hands, nurse's patience, widow's memory. Each stroke deliberate, unapologetic. He turned another page. This revocation nullifies the prior instruments. These changes go into effect immediately upon signature. Helen took a breath. Good. Page by page, her name was etched into history again, her version this time. The legal erasure of a son who had tried to write her out in slow motion, disguised as concern. When the last form was done, Jacob tapped the stack neatly, clipped the pages together, and slipped them into a leather portfolio. I'll file everything today. You'll receive certified copies in 3 business days. I'll wait by the mailbox, Helen said dryly. Jacob offered a tight smile. Would you like us to notify your son of the updates? Helen stood, smoothed her coat, gathered her gloves. I'd rather he discover it the way I discovered his plans, she said. Accidentally, but unmistakably. Jacob didn't argue. He knew enough not to. As she stepped into the hallway, the receptionist glanced up and gave her that same overbright smile. Helen returned it this time, but with a tilt of the head that made the girl glance quickly away. The elevator ride down was silent. Just her and the soft hum of descent. Helen looked at her reflection in the mirrored doors. Not younger, not stronger, just sure. And when the doors opened to the lobby and the noise of the city rushed in, car horns, footsteps, wind curling off the buildings, Helen stepped forward like she'd just been sworn into something. Because in a way, she had. 2 days later, Kyle texted, "Hey, just checking in. Everything okay? Need anything?" Helen read the message while sitting at the kitchen table, the light from the bay window casting slow-moving shadows across her hands. She was wearing her reading glasses, the floral pair Grace had picked out last Christmas, and flipping through her Fidelity login screen on the tablet. She tapped out a reply without thinking. "Thanks for checking in. All handled. Courteous, painless. A message you'd send to a neighbor's teenager after they shoveled your driveway." She didn't bother to ask what he really wanted. She already knew. The appointment with Jacob had been finalized, filed, and returned. The language was ironclad. Kyle was now, legally and practically, no one. She opened her financial dashboard. The accounts were all still in her name, but she moved with deliberate speed, changing backup contacts, emergency login methods, adding two-factor authentication. Every institution was called. Every representative given the new legal directive. Kyle's former access, revoked again, and confirmed in writing. When one young man on the phone hesitated, asking, "You sure you want to remove your son entirely, ma'am?" Helen didn't raise her voice. "I'm sure," she said. "And if you'd known him, you would be too." By mid-afternoon, the real shift had begun. Insurance, retirement, the safe deposit box in the Chase branch on Sycamore, a new signature card, a new password, a new emergency contact, Grace Eleanor Goddard. The final task that day was an appointment with Lena Walsh, a nonprofit consultant for elder advocacy and legal defense, recommended by Iris. They met in Helen's dining room. No offices, no folders, just 2 mugs of coffee and Helen's journal open between them like scripture. Lena was in her 50s, denim blazer, no makeup, sharp eyes, good listener. "You want documentation for future misrepresentation," Lena said, flipping a legal pad open, "and a timeline of cognitive capacity updates." "I want a record of what I remember," Helen said, "and what I don't, with context." Lena nodded. "And a log that can't be tampered with." "Understood." Helen reached down and lifted a folder from her tote, the memory logs. She had them reprinted, annotated with dated footnotes, and backed by scanned doctor visit summaries. "I'd like these protected," Helen said, "digitally and in secure storage." "I know someone at Iron Vault," Lena said, already making a note. "You'll get a lockbox and mirrored cloud access." Helen exhaled slowly. "Good." Lena leaned back. "Your son doesn't know this is happening, does he?" Helen stirred her coffee. "If he did, he'd be smiling right now." That earned a silence between them, dense and long. Then Lena smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't brighten the eyes. "You're not afraid of him." "I'm afraid of being misrepresented by him," Helen said. "There's a difference." That night, Iris called. Helen was in her robe, sipping hot cider on the back porch, the scent of late autumn curling in, dry leaves, wood smoke, the ghost of an oncoming frost. Her phone buzzed once. "Did everything go through?" Iris asked. "All of it," Helen said. "Even the stuff he doesn't know he had?" "Especially that." A pause. Then Iris said, low and certain, "He wanted your memory to fail." Helen looked out over the dark backyard. "Instead, I fortified it." "You're stone cold, Helen." "No," she said. "I'm clear." Another pause. Iris said, "Does he know?" Helen looked at her empty cider mug, a single wisp of steam still trailing from the rim. "He wanted access," she said quietly. She stood. "I gave him absence." And as she went back inside, her house empty, her night routine quiet, her locks freshly changed, Helen didn't feel smaller. She felt precise. And tomorrow, she'd finally pick up the phone and call someone Kyle had never even considered part of the picture. The notification lit up at 6:42 a.m., before the sun had even breached the windows. Kyle Goddard posted a new photo. Helen's thumb hovered over the screen before tapping. The image loaded, a shot of him in the backyard with his toddler son in his lap, coffee mug in one hand, caption in bold beneath it. "Taking care of 2 generations lately. No rest for the sandwich generation." 72 likes already. a handful of comments, most benign, but one, Tina's, stood out. Let's hope she remembers who you are next year. Proud of you. Helen stared at the screen, not blinking. The phone was steady in her hand, not a tremor in sight. She took a screenshot, cropped it to just the image and caption, saved it under a new folder in her cloud drive. Then she forwarded it to Jacob Merritt with a single-line subject. Potential challenge, time-stamped. Within minutes, she received an auto-receipt confirming upload to her protected archive. Helen closed the app and opened her journal. A new tab she'd added the night before was labeled Challenges and Defenses. She jotted the caption down verbatim. Then beneath it, in a different color pen, Pattern, soft public priming of cognitive narrative, suggests long-term intent. Her handwriting was as calm as ever. Cursive, slightly slanted, no hesitation. By the time Lena called that afternoon, Helen had already archived 3 more screenshots from earlier social posts. None quite as overt, but all suggestive. Mentions of juggling it all, her confusion, making tough choices soon. She's preparing his alibi, Helen said, when Lena asked about it. Lena didn't argue. You've built a firewall, she said instead. Next, we document your cognitive strength. Preemptively, irrefutably. Helen nodded. Already scheduled. 2 days later, Helen sat in a sterile exam room in a neutral beige blouse and navy slacks. Her hair was pinned back. Her purse, containing a flash drive with the last 6 months of medical logs, sat unopened on the chair beside her. Across from her, a neurologist in his 60s tapped notes into a laptop. Dr. Halverson, no small talk, no pity in his tone. Helen appreciated that. He began with the basics: orientation, dates, world events, vocabulary tests. Then the subtle ones: picture recall, repetition under pressure, pattern recognition, reverse counting. Helen completed each task with steady poise. She misspoke once, calling a stapler a binder, then caught it herself. Correction, stapler, the doctor nodded. When it was done, she sat with him in his office. He adjusted his glasses, skimming the results. For your age group, Helen, your recall is in the 91st percentile. Naming, categorization, procedural memory, strong. Attention control and orientation, above average. He flipped the page. No signs of neurological degeneration. No mild cognitive impairment. Certainly no dementia. Helen exhaled. But it wasn't relief, it was confirmation. May I have it signed and dated today? She asked. Dr. Halverson looked at her over the rim of his glasses. You planning to frame it? Something like that, he smiled. I'll have 2 originals printed and notarized before you leave. 3, Helen said. 1 goes into a vault. Back home, the official summary sat center stage on her desk. Signed, dated, certified. She scanned the document, attached the file to her encrypted archive, and marked it with a small red tag. Anchor Har. Do not alter. Then she copied the physical document to a secure folder labeled, If contested. She sipped her tea, then typed a brief note to Lena. Document received. No impairment. 91st percentile. Ready to proceed. Then she leaned back, the house silent around her, and smiled. Not out of pride, but out of something colder, steadier. Kyle had been counting on erosion. Instead, Helen had built a fortress. And the next step? She wouldn't wait for him to come knocking. She'd invite him in, on her terms. The email came in at 9:03 a.m. Subject: Regarding recent estate modifications, from Jacob Merritt, Esquerque to Helen Goddard. CC, Personal Records Archive. Helen opened it slowly, though she already knew what was inside. Jacob's tone was clinical, but the subtext carried heat. Helen, as anticipated, a preliminary inquiry was made by a third party regarding your recent estate revisions. The nature of the request was framed as concern for your cognitive state and capacity to understand the changes made. Attached is the preemptive legal response submitted on your behalf. Below, 5 attachments. Helen downloaded each with deliberate care, saving them in her secured drive under the folder labeled Defensive Strike. Logged by counsel. She opened the PDF first. Legal brief, estate competency response. drafted, signed, and filed with the timestamp in bold. It began. All decisions made by Ms. Helen Goddard regarding her estate, healthcare directives, and financial control were executed voluntarily, without coercion, and in accordance with all state and federal elder protection laws. These decisions were witnessed, notarized, and documented across 3 separate dates by legal and medical professionals. The second document, the neurological exam summary, attached in full, signed, stamped, notarized. The third, her updated advanced directives and healthcare proxy form, Grace's name clear at the top. Fourth, a notarized personal letter, her legacy statement, explaining in her own words why the changes had been made, calm, articulate, and unflinching. The final document, an affidavit from Lena Walsh, confirming Helen's proactive filing of cognitive evidence and elder autonomy documentation. No drama, no spectacle, just proof. Helen scrolled to the bottom of Jacob's message. Request withdrawn, no follow-up expected. She exhaled slowly and closed the laptop. That afternoon, she returned to Jacob's office, but this time, she brought something new. I want a clause added, she said, standing in his doorway before the receptionist could even announce her. To the trust. Jacob nodded. Go on. Helen sat, unfolded a typed paragraph from her handbag. A no contest clause. Immediate disinheritance for any beneficiary who challenges the estate. No mediation, no wiggle room. Jacob's brow lifted. That's sharp. Good, Helen said. He took the paper, reading it slowly. It's enforceable. Perfect. I'll file it today. As she left the office, the receptionist tried not to make eye contact. Helen didn't mind. She walked out of the building with the same crisp step she'd once used leaving classrooms after teaching final exams. She had passed something too. That night, she sat on Iris's balcony, a glass of dark red wine in her hand, the city twinkling in the distance like it didn't dare intrude. Iris poured her a second glass before taking a long sip herself. You just became legally unassailable, he said, raising her glass in mock salute. Wills, records, affidavits. Bloodlines beware. Helen clinked her glass gently against Iris's. And still perfectly aware, Iris grinned. They're going to hate this. I'm counting on it, Helen said. They sat in silence for a while, 2 women over 70, one battle-tested, the other just now putting on her armor. Then Iris asked quietly, So, what's next? Helen's gaze drifted out over the lights, the horizon stretching farther than anyone had expected her to see. She didn't answer. Not yet. The flash drive was in a padded envelope, slipped beneath Helen's front door sometime before dawn. There was no note, just her name, written in Grace's handwriting across the flap. Neat, sharp, underlined once. Helen picked it up without comment, her morning tea still steeping in the kitchen. She locked the door behind her, turned the deadbolt, and carried the envelope to her desk. She plugged in the drive. 1 file. Vid. Set to House 17. Family dinner. Move. No preview image, just a timestamp from last April, 4 months before the hollandaise brunch. Helen double-clicked. The screen lit up. The footage was grainy, phone shot, handheld. Someone, Grace, maybe, had propped it discreetly on the kitchen counter. It caught the Goddard dining room from the far side. Warm lighting, Chardonnay glasses, a casserole dish half finished at the center of the table. In the clip, Helen sat at the head of the table, back straight, fork resting beside her plate. She was telling a story, something about a vacation to Oregon. Mid-sentence she paused, searching for a word. She snapped her fingers once, gently. You know the thing on the trail, Nina interrupted. Oh, don't worry, Helen, she said, smiling too wide. We'll fill in the blanks when you blank out. Laughter. From the camera's angle, Kyle was barely in frame, but his voice rang out, clearer than it had any right to be. We'll have to move her before she forgets where the bathroom is. More laughter. Tina touched his arm. Helen, on screen, smiled. Thinly. She nodded, sipped her wine. The clip ended. Real Helen sat motionless, bathed in the dim blue glow of the screen. She didn't replay it. She didn't need to. She opened her secure archive and created a new folder. Why I rewrote everything then She dragged the file inside, pressed save, and clicked do not delete. Behind her, the kettle clicked off. Helen rose, poured her tea, and returned to her desk. As she stirred the honey in, her phone buzzed once. A text from Grace. I didn't know she was filming, but you need it. I'm sorry. Helen stared at the message for a moment, then typed back. You were right, I did, thank you. She didn't add anything else. No comfort, no reassurances. Some truths didn't require softening. Later that afternoon, she forwarded the clip to Jacob, marked confidential. Subject, additional evidence, verbal behavior, April 17th. He responded within the hour. Helen, this file completes the context timeline. You've built a bulletproof file. Any attempt to challenge your capacity or motivations now would be considered bad faith by any court I know. Also, well played. Helen smiled faintly, not with satisfaction, but with that same precise stillness she'd worn since brunch. The kind of smile you wear not because you won, but because you knew you would. That night, she lit a fire in the hearth. Then she opened a fresh page in her journal. No date. At the top she wrote, He didn't think I saw him. Then, beneath it, but now I can show the world what he thought no one would remember. The mail arrived late. Helen heard it drop through the slot around 4:15, the sound a soft slap against the foyer tiles. She waited, counted to 30, finished her tea first. Then she walked to the front door. 3 envelopes, one marked as junk, another from her pension office, and a thick, glossy packet with a return address that made her pause. Oak Springs Senior Living. Personalized Transitions Division. No postage meter. Hand-delivered. Helen carried it to the kitchen table, sliced the seal with a paring knife. Inside, a trifold brochure on buttercream paper stock with gold-embossed lettering. Photos of cheerful orderlies, curated gardens, sunlight through wide bay windows. Buzzwords in soft italics. Dignity, comfort, proactive care. Folded between the pages was a handwritten note, the letters a little too round, the ink slightly smudged from haste. Helen. We'd be happy to tour you through options. They have a memory wing. No pressure, no signature, but Helen didn't need one. Tina's handwriting was unmistakable. She stared at the note for a long time, not angry, not shocked, just unsurprised. Then she tore the brochure in half, once vertically, once horizontally, and slid the pieces into the trash with mechanical calm. The envelope, however, she kept. She walked it to her office, pulled open the side drawer of her file cabinet, and slid it into a folder labeled Manipulation Attempts, External. Then she sat at her computer, opened a blank email, and addressed it to Lena Walsh. Subject, Title Transfer Body, ready to finalize the transfer. Add restrictions, as discussed. She didn't sign it with her name, just the letter H. By the time Lena called back, the sun had dipped low and gold across the hardwood floors. You're sure you want to move on this now? Lena asked. I was sure before the brochure arrived, Helen replied. Now I'm certain. Let's lock it in then, Lena said. We'll record the full title transfer to the irrevocable trust. I'll walk it through myself. And the clause? Already drafted, Lena confirmed. The property cannot be sold, leveraged, or occupied by any individual not named as a trustee. No loopholes, no rentals, no temporary stays, not even for transitional support. Helen's voice remained steady. Good. Make it retroactive to last Thursday. Why Thursday? That's when I heard Kyle on speaker, Helen said, telling someone they'd figure out what to do with the house soon. Lena didn't respond right away. Then, I'll file it by morning. You'll get confirmation in 48 hours. After they hung up, Helen walked the length of her house in slow, deliberate steps. The baseboards, the hallway paint, the chipped door frame in Grace's old bedroom from when she'd slammed it shut at 13. Every inch had held her life. She was done pretending it didn't matter. At her desk, she opened her journal again. A new tab, Property Defense Actions. She wrote the time, the file name, the new legal clause. Then, at the bottom, in her smallest handwriting yet, they tried to move me out with a smile. And just below that, now the lock's answer to me. The camera was positioned head-on. No filters, no soft lighting. Just Helen, framed by her living room bookshelves, seated upright in a chair older than Kyle himself. She wore navy, a pearl brooch at the collar. Her glasses glinted softly in the lamplight. Grace sat beside the camera, her hand on the tripod for steadiness. Iris stood behind her, arms crossed, watching like a quiet sentinel. Helen took a slow breath. Then she spoke. Today is Tuesday, November 4th. My name is Helen Margaret Goddard. I am of sound mind, full capacity, and deliberate purpose. Her voice was even, clear. No trembling. I have reviewed, revised, and reaffirmed every element of my estate, medical directives, and legal proxies by choice. Not pressure, not confusion, and certainly not incompetence. She looks straight into the lens. If anyone claims otherwise, they do so from ego, inheritance, or insult, not truth. She paused for half a breath. I didn't forget my legacy. I edited the cast list. Behind the camera, Grace inhaled, quick, sharp, but didn't speak. I leave this message not out of fear, but finality. I am not waiting for doubt to narrate my story. This statement, this timestamp, this voice, mine, will live at the center of every archive, every file, every courtroom challenge. Permanently. She leaned forward just slightly. Challenge me, and you'll meet this version of me, prepared, documented, and still looking you in the eye. Then she sat back and nodded once. Grace hit stop. Later that afternoon, Jacob uploaded the final file into her estate architecture, locking it behind encryption. The system, a secured, court-compatible platform for vulnerable clients, auto-synced the timestamp, metadata, and witness credentials. He called her once it was done. We've added the legacy defense protocol, he said. Auto-response packets, hard file redundancy, trigger notifications to counsel if any claims filed. And the video? Anchored to your digital will, your trust, and your health directive. If he contests any of it, Helen, even a clause, it surfaces automatically in the discovery phase. She let that sink in. Good, she said. That's exactly how I want it. Jacob paused, then added, It's airtight, but brutal. I prefer durable, Helen replied. Lena dropped by later that night. No appointment, just a knock and 2 cups of tea. You did it, she said, settling into the armchair. You're protected from every direction now. Helen gave a small nod, her gaze lingering out the window. The yard was dark, still. The porch light flickered once, then held. You know what's funny, she murmured. Lena raised an eyebrow. Do tell. All this time, I thought I was preparing for a storm. And? Helen looked at her. I was the storm. Outside, a car slowed at the curb. Headlights flashed, then disappeared. Helen didn't get up. She just sipped her tea and waited. The documents sat on Helen's dining table like they had always belonged there. Not urgent, not ominous, just inevitable. 12 sheets in total, glossy stock, blue tabs marking each signature line. The papers were thick enough to whisper when she turned them. A sound she found satisfying, permanent. She opened the windows to let in the autumn air, clean and sharp. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor raked leaves into neat, dry piles. The rhythm of the rake mirrored the rhythm in Helen's hands as she aligned the pages, pen already uncapped beside her tea. At the top of the first page, in crisp serif lettering, the Dorsey Fellowship for Cognitive Arts Charter Agreement and Asset Transfer Declaration, her maiden name, front and center. Unapologetic. She hadn't used Dorsey in a legal context in over 4 decades. But this wasn't a nod to nostalgia. It was reclamation. Dorsey, not Goddard. Because lineage wasn't legacy. Helen reached for the pen and paused for only a moment. Then she began to sign. Page after page, her name appeared in sharp black ink. Under Founding Benefactor. Under Trust Originator. Beside Narrative Oversight Authority. By the 3rd page, her handwriting had settled into something even more precise. A deliberate echo of control. She scanned the breakdown with the same meticulousness she once reserved for peer-reviewed manuscripts. 2 long-term investment accounts, seeded into the trust. A conservative portfolio set to compound annually. 5 merit-based fellowships, renewable. Priority given to applicants exploring cognitive theory through writing, memory, or sensory narrative structures, not science of the brain. Art of the mind. The final page listed the trustees: Grace Eleanor Goddard, co-trustee and narrative historian Helen Margaret Dorsey Goddard, founding benefactor. No mention of Kyle, no clause, no acknowledgement, not omitted, erased. Helen signed the bottom line and pressed her initials in the corners, sealing each section like a documentarian closing a vault. When she was done, she stacked the pages carefully, smoothed the top sheet, and took a long sip of tea. Her hand trembled, not from weakness, but from release. The last of the authority had been transferred, but all of the authorship remained. Iris arrived just past 3, her coat dusted with wind-blown leaves, and 2 lattes balanced in her hands. She carried biscotti in a wax paper bag, and her eyes already knew something had changed. Helen handed her the folder without fanfare. Iris flipped through it in silence. "You used your maiden name," she finally said. Helen nodded once. "That name built more of me than my marriage ever did." "And the field?" "Cognitive arts, not decline." "Not decline," Helen said, "and not grief. Creation, analysis, story, the internal design of thought." Iris looked down at the paperwork again, then back up. "No mention of your son." "Not even in the metadata," Helen said quietly. Iris exhaled a low whistle. "You didn't just write him out." She set the folder down, looked her friend in the eye. "You rewrote the future." Helen gave a faint smile. "And this time, I kept the pen." They clinked coffee cups like toasting diplomats. Then the conversation faded into a soft, companionable silence. Later that evening, after Iris had gone and the house returned to stillness, Helen opened her journal. She added a new tab in the back: Legacy Actions. She recorded the trust's name, its federal EIN number, and the full date of establishment. She added the names of the trustees, the first funding amount, and a short line underneath: Legacy isn't built on names. It's built on proof. Then, after a long pause, she uncapped her pen again. This time, she wrote slower. Clarity is not forgetting. It's choosing what deserves to be remembered. She stared at the line for a long time, then closed the journal and walked to the kitchen counter. There, waiting like she'd planned it, was a note card with a blue floral border. She wrote only one thing on the front: the Dorsey Fellowship, for when memory is not enough. She folded the card in half and slipped it into a small ivory envelope. Wrote Grace on the front. Nothing else, no instructions, no explanations. She placed the envelope in Grace's travel journal, the one she'd left on the bookshelf after the recital. Grace would find it eventually, when she needed to. As Helen turned out the kitchen light and made her way to her desk, her phone buzzed once, a message. No name attached, no words, just a photo, her house, nighttime, a view from the curb, the porch light still on, no caption, no threat, but she knew. Helen locked her phone, then opened the drawer beneath her desk and slid it inside. She pulled the key from around her neck and turned the lock with one final click. The envelope was heavier than it needed to be. Legal weight paper, neutral branding, a beige square meant to feel professional, objective. It felt like theater to Helen, the kind performed in offices with carpets too thick and answers too thin. She opened it with a letter opener, smooth and silent. No tear, no ceremony. Inside, a letter requesting mediation. It didn't accuse, it didn't apologize. It asked, would she agree to an informal dialogue? Would she consider a family-based resolution process? Would she sit with Kyle and Tina just once for clarity? There was no handwritten signature, no direct contact, just the name of a conflict resolution specialist printed in sterile ink. Helen read it twice, then once more, just for the rhythm. She folded the letter again, slipped it into her shredder, sheet by sheet. The hum was satisfying, low and even, like a machine chewing through nonsense. When it was gone, she returned to her desk, opened her laptop, typed a short email to Jacob. Subject: response to mediation. Letter body declined. No response warranted. Log accordingly. She hit send. 5 minutes later, Jacob replied. Filed under closure, confirmed. No response warranted. That was the last it needed to be. She spent the next hour going through her contacts. Every number was a story. The shared number Kyle and Tina used for emergency updates. Blocked. The backup landline Kyle had given to Grace's pediatrician just in case. Deleted. Tina's personal cell. Tina's office line. The old number that still lived in the cloud, tied to some forgotten iCloud keychain, archived. No message sent. No dramatic goodbye. Just clean severance. A scalpel, not a hammer. When she was done, she brewed herself a strong cup of tea, added lemon, and sat at the dining table to label her luggage. The silence of it all, not grief, not regret, just peace. Grace arrived just after 3. She wore jeans, an oversized hoodie, and her expression held the kind of knowing that doesn't ask questions. She hugged Helen at the door and moved through the house like she was crossing over into something sacred. They packed side by side. Grace folded sweaters and notebooks. Helen laid out blouses and socks with military precision. Each corner creased, each item chosen, no clutter, no sentimentality. "Do you want me to update Lena or Jacob?" Grace asked as she placed a book into a zippered pocket. "No," Helen said. "They have what they need." "Will you check in?" Helen looked up, smiled gently, not evasively. "I'll be reachable," she said, "but I won't be available." Grace nodded. She didn't push. She never had. She turned to the nightstand and picked up the envelope Helen had addressed to her days ago. Just her first name, written in black ink. She didn't open it. Instead, she tucked it into the leather-bound journal Helen kept beside the bed. The one with the gold-foiled edge and a pressed leaf marking the middle. "Everything in here matters," Grace said. "I know," Helen replied. The room fell still. Helen looked around once, taking in the chipped paint on the windowsill, the faded photograph of Frank on the bookshelf, the crack in the floorboard by the bed. Each flaw had been earned, each space hers. She didn't feel loss. She felt design. At the front door, Grace hesitated. "Is this goodbye?" Helen shook her head. "This is a pause," she said softly. "Not for you." Grace smiled. Not big, just enough. Then, just before stepping off the porch, she turned back. "He tried to shrink you," she whispered. Helen met her eyes. He forgot who built the house. An hour later, Helen left with one suitcase and no forwarding address. She left no notes, no keys under a planter, no instructions pinned to the fridge. The locks were changed, the curtains drawn. The mailbox outside bore only her initials, HMDG. The driver helped load the suitcase into the trunk, didn't ask where she was going. Helen didn't tell him. She watched the house recede in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. No one watched her go, except the house. That night, in a cedar cabin tucked along a ridge 3 hours away, Helen sat by the wood stove. The fire was low but steady. She unpacked only 2 things, her journal and a clean notepad. She opened the journal first, ran her fingers along the final divider, then turned to a blank page and wrote one line, "I was never forgetful." Just quiet while remembering. She let the pen hover, then closed the book and picked up the clean pad. This was not forgetting. This was authorship. And she had earned every word she hadn't said. The folder sat on the desk like a held breath. It wasn't flashy. No label shouting important or confidential. No dramatic color, no thick lockbox. Just a slate gray binder with rounded corners. Archival grade. Cold to the touch. Clean to the eye. Durable to the point of defiance. Folder 3, written in small serifed font on the spine. Nothing more. Grace had seen folders 1 and 2 already. The estate paperwork, the trust filings, the medical evaluations and directives. She'd initialed margins, filed duplicates, confirmed notarizations, but this one had never been spoken aloud. Helen placed it on the desk like she was returning it to its rightful place. Inside, 28 sleeves, perfectly aligned and numbered in the bottom corner with a faint watermark. Each sheet cross-referenced, each item curated. Timelines, audio transcriptions, affidavits, annotated photos, therapist logs, neurological evaluations, power of attorney documents, both current and revoked, footage, letters, scans of Helen's journal entries, select ones, accompanied by notarized verification sheets to prove authorship and date. At the center, the memory logs, marked with footnotes, triggers, lapses, recoveries, cross-checked with doctor's notes, linked to calendar entries, dated, time-stamped, witnessed. The margin notes read like a legal novel no one had the courage to finish, and interspersed throughout, subtle annotations in Helen's hand, observations, quiet verdicts, names. She had built not just a record, but an unarguable map, from assumption to manipulation, through erasure toward reclamation. No gaps, no air, no exits. Grace sat across from her at the cabin's writing desk, the wood stove behind them casting amber light across the room. Outside, the wind worked its way through the trees like a patient question. Inside, silence ruled, soft, unbroken. Helen flipped to the last empty sleeve, removed a final sheet from a linen envelope. Grace recognized the paper. It was cotton stock, thick and textured, the kind used for statements meant to last longer than opinion. Helen slid the page into the sleeve and pressed it into place with both hands, then closed the folder. The motion was gentle, but the sound of the click of the clasp echoed like a vault ceiling shut. Grace hesitated. "What's in that last one?" Helen didn't answer right away. She looked at her granddaughter for a long moment, not with secrecy, but with ceremony. "It's not for court," she finally said. Grace blinked. "Then what is it for?" Helen rested her fingertips on the cover. "It's for the room where truth might be the last thing they want to hear." She passed the folder across the desk. Grace accepted it like it weighed more than it did. She opened the cover, turned to the final sleeve. The letter inside was short, 4 paragraphs, written by hand in Helen's unmistakable script, that careful blend of teacher's patience and widow's certainty. Grace read it silently. There was no melodrama in it, no accusations, no recitations of wounds or lists of events, just observations, clinical, cold, crystalline. A slow dismantling of the narrative Kyle and Tina had tried to construct, one of decline, confusion, inevitability. The letter didn't argue against that version. It disproved it, methodically, quietly, fatally. Each sentence was weighted with restraint, a scalpel rather than a knife. Then the last line. "You mistook my patience for permission. That was your first error. You mistook my silence for consent. That was your second. There will not be a third." Grace sat still, the page open in her lap, the fire behind her whispering. She could hear Helen's voice in every word, calm, unmoved, undeniable. She slid the page back into its sleeve, closed the folder. "Will he ever see it?" she asked quietly. "Only if he tries to force a story that doesn't belong to him," Helen said. Grace stood, walked the folder to the corner of the room where Helen's travel lockbox waited beside a fireproof document satchel. She placed folder 3 inside like a final offering, closed the lid, twisted the key once, then again. When she turned around, Helen was watching her. "Sometimes," Helen said, voice low, "the strongest memory isn't the one you keep." Grace stepped closer. "No?" Helen sipped her tea, gaze steady. "It's knowing who to forget." They didn't speak after that. The cabin didn't ask them to. Outside, the wind thickened. Snow began to fall, soft at first, then steadier, brushing the windows in short, weightless gusts. Inside, Helen stood, stretched, and walked to the fireplace. She watched the flames for a moment, then reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded page. Another journal entry. She placed it in the flames without a word, watched it curl and lift. Not everything needed to be filed. Some things just needed to burn. It appeared in the Hudson Valley Ledger on a Sunday. Not the front page, not buried either. The kind of profile piece reserved for people who had done something right, something thoughtful, unflashy, enduring. The headline read, "Professor Emerita establishes Memory Fellowship to honor precision and power." Beneath it, a black and white portrait. Helen seated before her old bookshelf, hands folded in her lap, a navy shawl draped over one shoulder. Her glasses caught the light just slightly, softening her gaze, but not dulling it. The caption named her fully: Helen M. Dorsey Goddard, founder, the Dorsey Fellowship for Cognitive Arts. Not inspired by, not in memory of, not in collaboration with. Founded by, authored by, owned. The article, written by a local culture reporter who'd done his research well, traced Helen's decades in the field of narrative cognition. It noted her tenure as a professor, her mentorship of dozens of students who had gone on to become novelists, therapists, screenwriters. It highlighted her return to public work after a quiet season, framing her scholarship trust as a profound act of legacy, not financial, but intellectual. The writer quoted her directly, one line lifted from her typed statement to the university board. You can lose memory, but not intention. The piece made no mention of Kyle, none of Tina, no family tree, no inherited narrative. It did not explain what had been erased, only what had been constructed in its place. A better story. Grace sat at a cafe near campus, a half-drunk coffee cooling at her elbow, her eyes fixed on the newsprint page. She'd read the article twice already, but her fingers still clung to the edges like it might dissolve if she looked away. She stared at the portrait. Helen looked quiet, unapologetically private, but unmistakably proud. The words in the article carried no bitterness, no suggestion of defense. They didn't have to. Legacy didn't need to explain itself. Grace folded the paper, tucked it into her bag beside her annotated lecture notes, and picked up her phone. She hadn't expected a notification. But it was there, a new comment on the Ledger's online article, username MNG23. Funny what people rewrite when they lose grip on reality. No name, no context, just venom wrapped in vagueness. Grace didn't respond. No one did. It hovered in the thread like a fly at a funeral, ignored until it starved. Helen never saw it. She'd stopped looking long before. 1 week later, the first recital funded by the Dorsey Fellowship was held in the university's smallest performance space, an intimate, wood-paneled hall, used mostly for thesis readings and student recitals. No stage lighting, no red carpets, just velvet chairs and the kind of acoustics that could make even a whisper feel sacred. Helen arrived 10 minutes early. She wore charcoal gray. Her coat brushed just past her knees. No fanfare followed her in, but the room knew. Grace greeted her near the entrance and guided her to the second row. Helen sat, hands folded neatly in her lap, her bag beneath the chair, eyes forward. As always, 4 students read. The first, a sophomore majoring in literature, performed a piece on sensory displacement after brain trauma. The second read a passage from a memoir in progress about a father's slow forgettings. The third, a film student, screened a short animated project using reconstructed dreams as storyboards. And the fourth read a poem titled When the Silence is Sharp. Her voice was small at first, then grew. By the third stanza, the room was motionless. Helen didn't cry, but Grace, seated beside her, saw her blink. Once, slowly, during a line about the scent of lavender and burnt toast. A memory, not spoken, not announced, just arrived. When the lights came up, Helen rose to her feet. She clapped once, and only once, but it was complete. Afterward, students lingered. One asked Grace if the woman in row 2 was that Helen Dorsey Goddard. Grace only smiled. Outside, the temperature had dropped. The wind scraped leaves across the steps. Helen paused before exiting, looking once more at the doors behind them. "Did you ever think you'd come back to this place like this?" Grace asked quietly. Helen shook her head, her hand still resting on Grace's arm. "No," she said. "But I always knew I would come back." They stepped out into the cold together, and this time, Helen didn't let go. Not of the arm beside her, not of the name she'd chosen, not of the future she'd rewritten. That night, as Grace unpacked her bag at home, the folded newspaper slipped from the side pocket and fell open on the floor. The article's headline stared back at her. Helen's face, faintly faded now, still steady, still composed. Grace picked it up, smoothed the crease with her hand, then reached for a pen. At the top of the page, just above the masthead, she wrote, "He wanted her confused. She built clarity in stone." She folded the paper again, this time more carefully, and placed it inside the envelope Helen had given her in the cabin. It was almost full now, almost ready. The lake trail curled around the edge of the ridge like it had been etched by a steady hand. Worn but not tired, it wound past bare trees, stone cairns, and drifted pockets of early snow, each one soft at the edges, as if winter had taken its time arriving. Helen walked it alone, no walking stick. No hand to hold, just her charcoal wool coat buttoned to the collar, her gloves tucked into one pocket, and her breath puffing out in quiet intervals. Her steps were slow, but deliberate, each one anchored. The boots she wore had belonged to her in every season. They gripped the gravel like they understood this path had never once been about retreat. At the trail's halfway point, she paused near a bench. The wooden plaque on the back read, "For those who remember without bitterness." She didn't sit. She just stood still, her hands folded in front of her, and let the air speak. There was nothing left to prepare, nothing left to file. The trust had been finalized, the guardianship assigned, the donation confirmed. The archive encrypted and duplicated. Everything with her name on it had purpose now. Everything without it no longer needed explaining. She wasn't waiting for Kyle to notice. She wasn't waiting for the next move. There was no next move. The story was done. She returned to the cabin just past dusk. The fire had gone out, but the room still held its warmth. Her desk lamp glowed low and golden. Her teacup, cold now, waited where she'd left it beside the open journal. No rush, no noise, only presence. She took off her coat, folded it over the back of the chair, and moved to the desk. She reached for the journal. Not the newest one, but the one she'd begun back in early spring. The one that bore witness to every decision, every silence, every line she'd drawn in ink and stone. It was almost full now. One blank page remained. She heard her phone buzz from across the room, a faint vibration on a surface somewhere unseen. She didn't move to check it. A moment later, her laptop pinged. She walked over, read the message. It was from Grace. "He's still bitter. Posted again. Something about legacy laundering. It didn't get traction. Again." Helen's eyes skimmed the message. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't frown. She simply typed back, "So let him be. I am remembered." She didn't wait for a reply. She closed the laptop and returned to the desk. The last entry came easily. Her handwriting, though slightly slower than it had been, remained measured, precise. She wrote, "Forgetfulness is temporary. So is entitlement." She paused for a moment. Then, beneath those lines, centered, intentional. "My son mocked my memory loss. So I remembered to forget him in every document." She let the ink dry completely before closing the journal. The snap of the leather band as it wrapped around the cover echoed louder than it should have. Finality always did. Outside, a light snow had begun again. The flakes this time didn't drift. They fell straight, steady, vertical, as if they knew exactly where they needed to land. Helen stood by the window and watched them gather along the edge of the deck. Everything the world had tried to overwrite in her, her presence, her control, her mind, lay protected now beneath a surface that looked soft, but held weight. She turned off the lamp, let the cabin go dark, sat down by the wood stove and ran her fingers along the grain of the chair. She thought of Grace, of the envelope tucked into her journal, of the fellowship, of the students reading aloud under amber stage lights, of the woman who had once forgotten where she put the jam jar, and how a single morning had become a prophecy someone else tried to write. She had corrected the prophecy, not loudly, not violently, but word by word, clause by clause, lock by lock. The phone buzzed once more. This time, she checked it. It was a text from Jacob. Official court record updated. No pending disputes. All items settled. All documents final. She read the message, then deleted it. Not because it wasn't important, but because it was no longer urgent. The war was over, and Helen had won. Not by remembering everything, but by knowing what and who to forget. The fire took quickly once she laid the kindling. She added only a single page to it, a duplicate from an early log entry, the one where she'd doubted herself. Where she'd circled a phrase, "Maybe it's happening after all." She no longer needed that version of herself. the one who second-guessed, the one who tolerated jokes for the sake of keeping the room calm. That Helen had protected everyone but herself. The woman watching the fire now had stopped asking for permission, and stopped leaving space for apologies that never arrived. In the morning, she would walk the trail again, not to remember, but because she could, and because no one had access to it anymore. Not him, not her. Only Helen. Her memory had not left her. It had been waiting, sharpening, for its moment, and now it was carved into stone.